This argument against the existence of God had been circulating for years and years now. Initially, we didn't really care about it until it was raised by very respectful figures like Neil Tyson, when he pointed out to the reality of natural disasters like volcanoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes to suggest a very specific conclusion, that the presence of such things somehow contradicts the existence of an all-powerful and all-good God.
If there is a God, God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
This perspective resonated with many people because the narrative itself is not new. It had been baked into mainstream media for years before we even saw this interview, especially in the medical dramas that we all grew up watching. I remember one episode that started with a young patient facing a terminal struggle, being admitted into the hospital where the main character was the doctor. As the episode progressed, the medical team did a lot of effort trying to save him, but their efforts seemed to fail. By the time we reached the emotional peak, where viewers were already in tears, the monitors went silent. After half an hour of sad, dramatic background music and emotionally charged scenes, the viewers were finally ready to hear the doctor deliver the shattering question. He comes to the camera and says, "If there is a God, how could he let that happen?" Notice how the argument was presented in a very emotional framework rather than a logical one. Emotional settings make it very hard for viewers to analyze and reason. And this is why this argument alone was reported to have led many Western Christians away from their faith. But what's surprising is, lately we started to receive similar questions from Muslims. Yeah, Muslims sent questions like, if Allah exists, why is there suffering? Why is there a loss of innocent life? Why the natural disasters? And of course, the most repeated question lately, why are innocent women and children being oppressed in front of our eyes? I understand that this argument gets very emotional, but don't forget that this argument mainly arises in Christian theology, because the argument itself was built on a one-dimensional view of God, the idea that God is only love without any other attributes. In Islam, we have a much more complete picture. The idea of this all-loving only God doesn't really match up with whatever we see in reality, and it doesn't even match the teachings of the Bible itself. If God is nothing but love, why is he punishing all humanity for an ancient mistake that Adam committed? If God is all love, why is there suffering in this life? And most importantly, by the way, why is there an eternal punishment for the disbelievers? An all-loving God wouldn't do that. I will let the Christian scholars answer all of these questions, because it's not our job. As for now, I will just focus on the Islamic perspective. Let's break it down step by step. Number 1. Is God powerful enough to create a world without suffering? And the answer is, of course. As a matter of fact, he already did. He created the perfect world and he called it Jannah. Number 2. Why am I not in this Jannah? Because Jannah is a destination, not a starting point. Being there is actually simple. The entry ticket is just believing in one God and obeying him. Number 3. Why is there suffering in this world? And the answer is, why should we expect otherwise? Because of the exposure of the mainstream media, some of us have developed this sense of entitlement, expecting the Creator to provide us with the reward before we even finish the work. How about we burst this pink expectations bubble and open our eyes to reality? This life isn't a hotel. It's an exam room, a temporary small trial that determines our real everlasting life. To really understand why is there suffering, you have to ask yourself, can you describe color to a colorblind person? Go ahead, try. Describe the color red to someone who's never seen color in his life. You can't, right? Because you can't describe a sensation that has no reference point. How about this? Describe the sweetness of honey to someone who was born without the sense of taste. The concept simply doesn't exist to him. Do we agree? Perfect. Now listen to this. Allah is telling us that we're living in a test that will result in either eternal happiness or eternal pain. And He is describing for us this eternal happiness and eternal pain through words. If there was no suffering or pain in this life, it will be impossible for us to understand what eternal pain is. The same applies to the happiness in Jannah. It will be like describing color to a colorblind person. What we feel in this life, every joy and every heartbreak, is just a microscopic fraction of what is coming. A 0.01% preview of what we're promised in the hereafter. Just to help us understand verses like this one, or this, or this. These are just sensory shadows, a tiny sample size of a much greater reality. Without these previews that we can experience, the description of the hereafter would just be an abstract concept. Words on a page with no weight or meaning. Without seeing the disasters that come along with one simple volcanic eruption, we wouldn't be able to understand a hadith like this. The fire of this world is one part of many parts of the fire of the hereafter. But because we were allowed to experience it, the warning has a scale. Even the little stuff, by the way, like fever, for example. The Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, said, fever comes from hellfire. This isn't a medical advice, it's a spiritual perspective. Let me rephrase it for our audience who have no access to the Arabic culture. Even small things like fever are a reminder of the hereafter punishments that we should avoid. Every little bit of suffering you go through is there to remind you of the severity of Allah's punishment in the hereafter. It's Allah giving us the tools to understand what's at stake, so we can choose the path that will lead us to Jannah instead. One more thing you should think about. What if someone wants to be a shaheed, a martyr? In our faith, it means someone who dies as a hero defending his community from harm. He then takes the fast track to the highest degree in Jannah. The question is, how will he die as a shaheed without an aggressor? To be a hero, you need a villain, right? In a perfect world, you can't be a shaheed. Another example. Someone wants to do the good deed of giving charity to a hungry kid. How would you find a hungry child to feed in a world where hunger doesn't exist? Someone wants to help a homeless family. How will he find a homeless family in a perfect world? And so on. If there were no suffering, doing good deeds wouldn't even be an option. How will you do any good deeds? On the other side, the same applies to sin. If resources were abundant, there would be no motivation to sin to begin with. If everything was infinite, stealing wouldn't just be wrong, it would be impossible. For example, if oil were abundant, some countries wouldn't even need an army. Got it?
Yeah, boy.
Imagine a typical multiple choice test in school. Every question should at least have one correct answer and one wrong answer. Without the existence of the wrong answer, the test wouldn't make any sense. Now imagine one of the kids claiming that the existence of wrong answers in the test proves that the teacher doesn't exist. How funny would that be? This is why some people jokingly say that when an atheist went to a horror movie, he said that this movie has no director. They shouldn't joke like that. Imagine playing Super Mario with no evil turtles to jump on. How will you even win or lose? The world, by design, has some imperfections to allow for a test to take place. You can't have a test of character in a world that requires no character. In other words, a perfect world is not a suitable testing environment to begin with. Also, we don't believe that God is exclusively all love. That's a Christian belief. In Islam, God isn't just a symbol of love. He is the totality of all of his attributes. Look at his names. Al-Rahman, Al-Adl, Al-Qahhar, Al-Muntaqim. The all-merciful, the utterly just, the ever-dominating, and the producer of retribution. These aren't contradictions. They are the complete picture of a sovereign king. Al-Mu'izz, Al-Muzil, the honorer and the humiliator. Al-Muhyi, Al-Mumit, the giver of life and the giver of death. And of course, Al-Nafi' Ad-Dar, the giver of benefit and the giver of harm. Yes, you heard me correctly. These names don't contradict each other. They complete the picture. They prevent you from living in a pink bubble of expectations. Allah said in Surah Al-Baqarah, I will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient. Those who when disaster strikes, they say, indeed we belong to Allah and indeed to Him we will return. Those are the ones whom will receive blessing and mercy from their Lord, and those are the rightly guided. How will Allah test our patience in a perfect world? Do you think you'll just enter paradise without going through trials? The same trials that came to the people before you? This verse alone is enough to destroy this attitude of entitlement. Every disaster that happened was written in a register before Allah made it happen. Indeed, that is for Allah easy. Our understanding of God is realistic. It fits the world we observe and it fits the reality of the hereafter. We recognize that He is the creator of all things, good and bad, but we don't verbally assign harm to Him in an explicit way out of politeness. And regarding the question about kids who died in natural disasters, don't worry about them. Because in our belief, children who pass away are safe. No soul is held responsible for a sin it didn't commit. We're not worried about them. We're actually worried about you. Because their tragedy is your test. Yes. Will you offer relief to the survivors or will you look away? Will you reach out in mercy or will you turn away in stinginess? This is the reality. Their struggles is your trial. Also, the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, said that Allah forgives our sins for every bit of pain that we endure with patience. On the day of resurrection, when people who have suffered affliction are given their reward, those who were healthy will wish that they had suffered more, just to have a fraction of that reward. Strange are the ways of the believer. If good happens to him, he says Alhamdulillah and he is rewarded. And if bad happens to him, he also patiently says Alhamdulillah and he also gets rewarded. There is no such thing as a losing scenario for a believer. Both are just different doors for the same paradise. And by the way, life is much, much more complex than whatever you think. Let me explain. This is John B. Calhoun, the famous American ethologist. In the early 70s, he conducted an eye-opening scientific experiment on mice. He created the perfect environment for them, which had unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, comfortable temperature, plenty of nesting material, and medical care. In short, he created a literal mice paradise, an environment where every struggle was eliminated. At first, everything looked great. They were happy, population increased, and they had normal social behavior. But afterwards, the mice started to behave in very strange ways. Aggression increased between them for some reason. Even mothers started to neglect their young. The perfect world broke them. Without the need to compete to survive, their social fabric unraveled. And finally, despite having everything they needed to live, they lost the will to survive. And they went extinct in the middle of this abundance. This experiment is called Universe 25. Look it up and write me in the comments why do you think this happened. Also check this out. During the Second World War, the US Coastal Guard left 29 deer on St. Matthew's Island in Alaska. This island had no predators for the deer whatsoever. 20 years later, the population exploded from 29 reindeer to 6,000. But without predators to keep the herd healthy and the environment in balance, the system collapsed. Within 3 years only, they were all gone. This event showed us that the existence of the predator is actually vital for keeping the prey alive. We learned the counterintuitive truth that the predator is actually the guardian of the prey. The more you learn. Even, by the way, in the moments of death that might seem harsh to us, there is actually a design of mercy. For example, when a zebra is caught by a lion, its brain floods the whole body with endorphins, the natural painkillers that dull the trauma. Even in what we call cruelty, there is a layer of biological compassion that we are only beginning to understand. Nature is infinitely more complex than our simple assumptions. If we couldn't even grasp the biological necessity of a predator, how can we expect our humble minds to judge the wisdom of the all-wise creator? You know what? Let me just flip the table. The problem of evil isn't an argument against God. It is actually an argument against atheism. I'll show you how. This is C.S. Lewis, the famous Cambridge University professor. He fought in the trenches in the First World War, he saw death and senseless violence firsthand, and he saw the death of his mother. That, as well as the exposure to the rationalist and humanist thinkers of Oxford University, made him question the existence of God. But after being an atheist for 20 years, he finally got it. He finally realized that you can't call a line crooked unless you have a concept of what is straight to begin with. He asked himself, what was my reference point when I was complaining about the cruelty of the world? Fish don't complain about being wet because they naturally belong in the water. If we are just part of this nature, why do we see wrong in it? In other words, we only complain about injustice because we were born with an innate standard of justice. I quote, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I had this idea of just and unjust? According to Stephen Hawking, the human race is just a chemical scum. If we are just meaningless atoms, as the theory suggests, why do 8 billion pieces of biological matter have a moral compass? Why do you feel this outrage? In Islam, we call this fitra, the innate internal software that we are born with. But if you don't believe in this fitra, why are you complaining?" According to the leaders of modern atheism like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, there is no purpose, no evil, no good, and no free will. We are all just chemistry. Free will is just an illusion. If you take this position, you immediately lose your right to complain. You simply can't call the world unjust if you don't believe in a source of justice. You can't complain about darkness if you deny the existence of light. The universally agreed on definition of good and evil is in itself evidence of the existence of our test, our choice, and our heavenly records that we are filling right now as we speak. On the day of judgment, this entire world will feel like it lasted only 1 hour. Make this hour count. If this perspective changed how you look at the world, help it reach someone who is still searching for answers. And if you heard critics asking how come the Quran both confirms and contradicts the Bible at the same time, check out my full refutation. جزاكم الله خيرا. Assalamu alaikum.